First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming back to session 2 of the course Talmud for the Curious. We're very happy we didn't scare everybody away with all the information that we gave you in week 1. There is a lot of information to absorb, and we understand that. It's a complicated subject. Some of the material, especially the important stuff, is going to get repeated in other sessions, so not to panic. The other thing to be aware of, as Jenny said, we are recording the course. So if you look in your chat button on the side, there is the link. Jenny posted the link. There are many ways to get the link. You can get it from here. If you look on the bottom of your chat, all the way down at the bottom, there's 3 little dots. And if you click that, it'll let you save the chat so you can save the link. But you can always approach either Sheldon or Jenny and get the link. The material is, by being recorded, gives you a wonderful opportunity to go back and review the material, or if you miss something, or if you can't make a session. So we're very excited. And I really want to shout out to Jenny, because without her technical ability and all the effort that she put in, this would not be happening. So I'd give her a big hug if I could get there, but it's a Zoom hug. So anyhow, thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
So we're going to start today by going on a 2,000-year historical journey. As we have said, context is critical in understanding Talmud. So it's important to us to understand, why did the Jews create the Talmud? Why was it necessary? You also heard Sheldon and the Rabbi mention that there are 2 Talmuds, a Babylonian Talmud and a Palestinian Talmud. And the one that we're studying is the Babylonian. So how come we've got 1 Torah and 2 Talmuds? And I hope that I will, in the next several minutes, be able to help answer that question. So if this works the way it's supposed to, you should be seeing my slides. We're good, Jenny? Good. So Jews in Babylonia. So let's get started. So first of all, a timeline. So this is sort of what we're doing. So all the way on the left, David writes the Psalms, Solomon builds the temple, and that little tiny red spot on the end is where the Romans come along and destroy the temple, the second temple, in 70 AD. So we're going to kind of cover this in the next 30 to 40 minutes. Hang on. First of all, in case you don't have a roadmap and you haven't been to Babylon, this is where Babylon is. It's in what we call Iraq today. So it's in between the Tigris and Euphrates River. That's where Babylon is. And then there were 2. After the death of King Solomon, the Hebrew kingdom divided into 2 pieces: Israel, which is the blue, bigger, stronger one, and Judah in the south. In 722 BCE, which means before the Common Era, before the birth of Christ, here come the Assyrians, and they conquer the northern kingdom of Israel. And what was pretty common business at the time, they dispersed the population. And that's where the 10 lost tribes of Israel come from. So we worry about what the Nazis did and all that. Realize at this point in history, they're the only place in the world where there are Jews. There are 2 tribes left in Judah. That's it. We're nowhere else. About 150, 200 years later, Judah is conquered by the Babylonians, King Nebuchadnezzar, in 586. And the first temple, Solomon's temple, is destroyed. And the leading Jews are all exiled to Babylon. They left sort of the peasants and the workers behind, but the priests and the leaders, everybody went to Babylon, which was kind of standard operating procedures back then when you got conquered.
In 586 BC,
After defeating the Assyrians, a new Mesopotamian empire invades Israel. The Babylonians ransack the temple and systematically burn the sacred city. Before his eyes, the Babylonian victors slay the sons of Zedekiah, the last Davidic king, then blind him. After 400 years, Israel is wiped out. The Babylonians round up the Israelite priests, prophets, and scribes and drag them in chains to Babylon. Babylonian records confirm the presence of Israelites, including the king, in exile. Without temple, king, or land, how can the Israelites survive? Their journey begins with the ancient scrolls, which some scholars speculate were rescued from the flames of the destruction.
Among the exiles from Jerusalem to Babylon were priests from the temple. And they seem to have brought with them their sacred documents, their sacred traditions.
It is during this period, through the exile, that the exiles realized that even far away from their homeland, without a temple, without the priesthood, without kings, they're still able to worship God, be loyal to God, and to follow God's commandments.
In 539 BC, the Babylonian Empire is toppled by the Persians. As written in the Bible, Yahweh orchestrates a new exodus. Among one group of returning exiles is the prophet Ezra. Back in Jerusalem, he gives a public reading of the written Torah to re-establish the covenant.
All the people gathered together. They told the scribe Ezra to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given to Israel. He read from it from early morning until midday, and the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. Nehemiah 8, 1-3.
To me, it's one of the most moving moments in the whole Bible.
As we continue our story, so the Jews get exiled to Babylon. And this map shows both the purple was the Assyrians, the 10 tribes get dispersed, lost to history. The green and orange show the Jews in Babylon. This is a very beautiful picture from the Renaissance, basically describing the pain that the Jews experienced. Fortunately, the Babylonians allowed the Jews to remain as a community. So elders arose and Jews were able to maintain their rituals and customs. There was cross-pollination that happened. Jews learned to speak Aramaic. We've heard about Aramaic. This is where the Jews learned to do that. They adapt the Babylonian calendar, and sub-Babylonians convert to Judaism. Synagogues take the place of the temple. Yeshivot are formed. So a very vibrant community of Jews exists in Babylon. The Persians were the ones who let the Jews come back. The Persians conquered the Babylonians. Cyrus, who really doesn't get much play in this, was for the time, he wouldn't be very PC or woke today, but by his standards, he was a pretty benevolent king. So 70 years after the exile, Cyrus issues the Edict of Restoration and allows Jews to return to Israel. He even gives money to support the project. But only a minority of the Jews, only about 42,000 go back. The remainder stay in Babylon. Why did Cyrus do this? The Jews regard Cyrus as a benefactor. He's even called in Isaiah the anointed one, the Messiah. And he is the only non-Jewish figure in the Hebrew Bible to get that title. It comes from their religion. They believed in a religion called Zoroastrianism, and they believed there would be a final epic battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And Cyrus was benevolent, and he wasn't stupid, and he figured, well, the Israelis got a pretty good God. I'd like him to be on our side. So he said, go back, and I will let you rebuild your temple. So now we get to the Second Temple period. There's initially a modest temple built about 515. It's expanded by King Herod, and this temple stands for 600 years until destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. We get the priesthood, and the temple becomes central to Judaism. And the entire Hebrew Bible is assembled and written down and codified at this time. Empires come, empires go. Here comes the Greeks. Alexander the Great defeats the Persians. He suddenly dies in 333. His empire is divided up, and we get what is called Hellenism. Those of you who heard about the story of Hanukkah would be familiar with this term. And the Jewish upper class, the elites, start to assimilate. They start to absorb Greek culture. It leads to a split within the Jewish community. The Jews rebel against King Antiochus. Again, this is the Hanukkah story with Judah Maccabee. They win their freedom. They reestablish a Jewish kingdom. They form an alliance with the new big guy on the street. The 800-pound gorilla at that time is Rome. The trouble is, and we've all seen Godfather 2, when you make a deal and you get something, you're expected to give something back. And ultimately, Rome installs a series of puppet kings. One of the most famous is King Herod, who rules over the Jews for 40 years. But finally, the Romans conquer and take control of Judea. We're not a very nice people. We're very stiff-necked, I believe is the term that is often used. So the Jews rebel. The first rebellion is in 66 to 73. Initially, we did okay, but the problem is we were fighting the Romans at the peak of their power. The Romans didn't lose. It didn't matter what it took to win. They weren't going to lose. They send Vespasian and legions. They retake Jerusalem. They destroy the Second Temple and the Jewish state. The destruction of the center of Judaism, the temple, was a disaster of epic proportions. Judaism might have disappeared at that point, except for somebody like Yohanan ben Zakkai, or Zakkai, if I said his name wrong. Judaism had to be rebuilt, and he was the right person in the right place to do it. So remember, Jerusalem was surrounded by the Romans. Ultimately, it's captured and destroyed. Ben Zakkai escapes from Jerusalem. His disciples smuggle him out in a coffin. He pretends to be dead, and the Roman soldiers let him leave. He makes his way to the Roman camp, and he meets the emperor, the ruler, Vespasian, and he begs him to give him a place so he can reestablish Jewish learning. And he predicts to Vespasian that he is going to become emperor. At that point, he's just a general. Turns out the emperor in Rome dies shortly thereafter, and Vespasian becomes the emperor. And as a result, he awards Ben Zakkai what he wants. He says, and this is what the Talmud said, Vespasian says to Ben Zakkai, I will be going to Rome to accept my new position, and I will send someone else in my place, continue waging war and ruling over you. He sent his son, Titus. But before I leave, ask something of me that I can give you. And Ben Zakkai made his request. give me Yavna and its sages, and do not destroy it. Spare the dynasty of Rabbi Gamliel, and do not kill them as if they were rebels. So he was able to establish this religious academy at Yavna. And without the temple, Judaism had to be rebuilt. So we needed something to replace the temple, the synagogue. We needed someone to replace the priests, the rabbis. There were no more animal sacrifices at the temple. We now have prayers. So Ben Zakkai was the most influential Jewish sage of the first century, and he laid the foundations on which Talmudic and Rabbinic Judaism, the type of Judaism that we Jews have today, can be traced back to Yavna and Ben Zakkai. But sometimes we don't learn, do we? So there was a second Jewish revolt, okay? The Roman Emperor Hadrian decided he wanted to make all the citizens of the empire somewhat similar. So he wanted them to all adopt Greek Roman customs. For the Jews, that meant rebuilding Jerusalem as a pagan city with a temple dedicated to Zeus. In addition, there was an occupying army and high taxes on the Jews. So the Jews do what Jews do. We revolted. And that was the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135 by Simon ben Kosaba or ben Kokhba. He takes on a messianic zeal and ideal. Eventually, we put up a pretty good fight, but eventually Rome conquers Judea again. You can fool me once, but you can't fool me twice. The Romans said there will never be another Jewish revolt. So the Romans carry out a scorched earth policy. They basically try to wipe out Judaism, remove it from the face of the earth. Male Jewish prisoners sold into slavery. Judea is no longer Judah, it's Syria, Palestina. Jerusalem is leveled and renamed. It is forbidden on pain of death to study Torah and Jewish laws. A reign of terror in Judea is by Rome. So Jews are banished. Judaism seems to be in peril of dying out. The Jewish centers of learning are gone. There was fear that the Jewish oral law and Torah would be lost. So the surviving remnants of scholars in Judea, called Tanaim, began to write down what they knew. And rabbi sages started to insert their importance. So Rabbi Judah Hanasi, the prince, which is what Hanasi means, codified the work. They took all the stuff that they could remember and that they could write down, and they created the Mishna, which is, as Sheldon has told you, was the core teaching for the Talmud. Remember, we still have a Jewish community in Babylon because all the Jews in Babylon didn't return, thankfully. The Jews were allowed to live as a recognized minority, and they developed their own institutions, and the Babylonians were pretty good. As long as they stayed loyal, paid their taxes, they were left alone. They had a head of the community called an elegach or resh galut. The elegachs could trace their descendancy from the house of David. The Jewish community grew, it prospered, until there were about 1 million Jews living under the Persians and the Parthians. And I'm going to show you quickly who the Parthians were. But meanwhile, back in Palestine at the same time, it just got worse and worse for the Jewish remnants that were left. And many of the surviving Jewish scholars fled, and some of them went to Babylon. And in Babylon, the Jews were able to establish religious academies, the two most famous being at Sura and Pumba Dita, and they were able to create new opinions and new Jewish customs. So one more empire, the Roman Empire, and you can see in the middle where Gaza was. And again, the Jews, unfortunately, were right in the middle. And then you have the Parthian Empire. Now, the Romans were never successful in conquering the Parthians. They tried several times, but they were not able to do it. So the Babylonians, Jews, had over 2,000 years of stability. The Persians, the Sasanians, and ultimately the next empire as well, were able to keep the Romans out and the Byzantines out. So the persecution that the Romans and Byzantines were exerting on the Jews did not afflict the Babylonian Jews, which allowed Jewish scholarship to flourish at the great yeshivas that were able to continue to exist in Babylon. And this is where the Babylonian Talmud gets written. The Jewish legal academies in Babylon became the leading centers of Jewish law and Jewish learning in the 4th through the 6th centuries. And so the Babylonian Talmud is compiled over a period of about 200 years between the year 300 and the year 500. And the Babylonians' Jewish academies were the undisputed authorities at that time. This is a stone image of Rabbi Ashi teaching at the yeshiva in Sura.
I'd like to pop in for a moment. Go back to that that wonderful bas-relief, if you could.
Yep, this
Yes.
one.
So you can see they're teaching, and the students are in rows, and the back rows are the junior students. And as they get more and more senior, they move up and up and up until the front rows are the most senior, ready to take over as leaders. So it's really sweet the way they show the gallery here. I just wanted to point that out. Go ahead.
Thank you. So Baghdad, or Babylon, as its name changes, becomes the capital of the Arab Caliphate, of the Abbasid Caliphate. So the Babylonian Jews are now living in the center of the Muslim empire. So they're a tolerated minority. They don't have full rights, but they are considered people of the book, and they are pretty well tolerated. And as a result, they continue to flourish. And they learn to speak and write in Aramaic and Arabic, and a combination, a hybrid language. So they live under medieval Muslim rulers for 500 years. And Jews change. This is where Jews stop becoming farmers and start to become businessmen and start to live in cities. And the Jews create a parallel culture of their own within the Islamic society. And you have a Talmudic and synagogue-based Jewish culture that flourishes throughout the Muslim empire, including on the Iberian Peninsula, which is where Sephardic Jewry has their heyday, and Sephardic Jews come from, the Iberian Peninsula. So again, we have two temples. The remnants of the Jews in Palestine created the Palestinian Talmud, but the Babylonian Jews had much greater freedom and greater time to create a much more extensive Talmud. It has about 1 million more words. It covers a much broader range of topics and commentaries, and it was codified about 150 years later. And this is the Talmud. This is the version that we and most other Jews today study. Rashi's commentaries that I know Sheldon will be speaking about, that are central to the proper understanding of many Talmudic passages, are found in the Babylonian Talmud. This community continued for 2,000 years. Unfortunately, the Baghdadi community continued to exist until 1948. I think we all know in 1948, the British mandate ended, the state of Israel was declared, and unfortunately, the persecution of the Jewish community in Iraq intensified. Israel mounted a rescue operation, and between 1948 and 1951, over 120,000 Iraqi Jews were airlifted out of the country. Yitzhak Magal, who we all know and love, at the age of 7, was among those immigrants who were lifted out of Iraq. And that essentially was the end. A 2,000-year community was gone. There is essentially no Baghdad community at this point. So that's my history lesson. Yitzhak may have some words that he wants to say. Feel free. If there are any questions or comments, this is your opportunity until we move on to the next topic.
Well, I don't have really, you did very well, and just several names that you little bit. Yehuda Hanasi, Ben Zakkai, and now the immigration to come to Israel in 1951, as you said, I was 7 years old, and they brought us, the two people actually was involved in bringing the Jewish people, the Iraqi, the Persian, from Babylon. Was Shlomo Hillel, one of them, and then the other one was Mordechai Ben Porat. Both are dead now, but they brought us a very difficult time. They brought us to Israel with airplane that flew from Iraq to Israel, or to Kafrsin and to Israel. Each one has to get, each family will bring only 2 valises for family. And in the passport would say, going without returning. Absolutely, just like this. You go and you not return anymore. So you come to Israel and we live in the Ma'abarot. Ma'abarot, it's a place that, you want me to talk about it? Or?
We probably don't have time, Yitzhak, only because of...
Okay. All right, so all I say, we came to Israel and we were very happy. We kissed the floor. My grandfather, I remember him, went down and bow and kiss the floor. I am in Israel. That's the story.
Thank you. Thank you. Sheldon?
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're going to continue to learn how to swim in the Sea of Talmud. Last week, I discussed how the oral law was written down for the first time about the year 200 of the Common Era and became the Mishna and ultimately the Talmud. This afternoon, I will discuss some of why the Talmud was created at that time. I'll begin with Rome's destruction of the land of Israel and the man who saved Judaism. Then we'll discuss the internal workings of the Gemara, which is the oldest and most important of the commentaries on the Mishna. I will use 4 examples to explain the Gemara and its purpose in Talmud. We will discuss murder, the famous ox that gored another ox. Then we discuss a golem in the Talmud. And finally, the Talmud's stream of consciousness conversations. I'm going to begin in the year 200 CE, as Richard said, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was the last of several Jewish-Roman wars. And we are now at a very dangerous crossroad in Jewish history. Jenny? As Richard said, following the disastrous Bar Kokhba revolt, this is where we find the Jewish people. First, there's no longer a temple in Jerusalem and no priesthood. Second, Jerusalem, which had been a holy city and the capital of the Jewish people for hundreds of years, was destroyed. The Romans renamed Jerusalem, turned it into a pagan Roman city. Jews were forbidden to enter the city on penalty of death. Third, there are few teachers or scholars left to teach Torah. Rabbi Akiva, one of the most important Jewish scholars in our history, believed Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. So Rabbi committed himself and all his disciples to the revolt. But by the end of the revolt, Rabbi Akiva had been tortured and killed, and 24,000 of his disciples and students were also killed. So there are few scholars or teachers left to carry on the work. Fourth, the Jewish people. It is estimated that about 500,000 people in Judea were killed, exiled, or enslaved, and entire villages and towns destroyed. Judea was essentially depopulated. And fifth, the land itself. Rome cut down the trees and plowed salt into the land to discourage the reemergence of the Judean people. And they renamed the land Syria-Palestine. Rome wanted to make sure the Jewish people would not rise again. Jenny? You could turn Jenny off, please. Thanks. Rome, which ruled most of the known world at that time, had 30 military legions. The Bar Kokhba revolt was so difficult for Rome that at one point, 10 legions, 1/3 of all Roman military forces in the world, were brought into Judea to quell the uprising. Bar Kokhba initially did well, destroying 2 Roman legions, but he was eventually killed and the revolts quashed. After the war, Rome's extreme anger and hostility were visible in its attempt to destroy Judea and permanently destroy the Jewish people. Now let's look at this in a different way. Jenny? Here we see Judaism's Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, which according to tradition stood in the center of the Garden of Eden. Now the Jewish people have known persecution many times in the past. Jenny? On the left, in the 15th century, the golden age of Spanish Jewry came to an end with the Jews' expulsion from the Iberian Peninsula. This chopped off some big branches from our tree of life, but the tree was strong and it regrew and blossomed again. On the right, in the 20th century, the Holocaust chopped off many more big branches from our tree of life, but the tree was strong, the tree regrew and blossomed again, as witnessed by our presence here today on Zoom. But what Rome tried to do was much worse and much more dangerous than these later persecutions. Jenny? As opposed to cutting off only branches, Rome's aim was to cut down the entire tree, cut the trunk, kill its roots, and kill Judaism. This was, therefore, the most dangerous time for Judaism and the Jewish people in the last 2,000 years. Jenny? You can try, go ahead. No, not yet, Jenny. Back to me. Thank you. So following the destruction of Judea, the future of Judaism looked bleak. And it is in this troubled time that one man, Judah Hanasi, which means Judah the Prince or Judah the Patriarch, saved Judaism. Judah the Prince was the leader of the Jewish people at that time. He saw the land depopulated, people exiled, enslaved, and killed, scholars scattered. He understood this could mean the end of Judaism and the Jewish people. Because as Jews scattered around the world, they would assimilate, and Jewish knowledge and Jewish law would be forever lost. As discussed in last week, up until this time, the oral law was only transmitted orally. It was forbidden to write down the oral law. But Judah the Prince recognized the unprecedented threat to Jewish life, and he began writing down the Jewish oral law for the first time, and he created the Mishna. We're going to see now a 4-minute video, which begins in the middle of a larger video. Jenny?
Or Jewish School of Higher Learning, which centers in Yavne until the Romans move it to the Galilee region after the Bar Kokhba revolt. But after the revolt, the threat against Jewish nationhood is at an all-time high. The Romans close down the Beit Din and expel almost all of the Jews from Judea. The Torah and the memories of the land of Israel remain the sole vestiges of nationhood among the scattered Jews in the diaspora. In a world where Judaism faces this real threat, one man takes remarkable initiative to preserve the values of Torah study and the continuity of the Jewish community. Rav Judah Hanassi rises to fame in the Galilee in the north of Israel in the 2nd century. The grandson of Rabban Gamliel of Yavne, a former president of the Sanhedrin, Judah becomes the leading Torah scholar and therefore the official community leader when he assumes the title of president after the Romans once again permit self-governance within the Jewish community. Judah Hanassi fears that the fragmentation of world Jewry might lead to the disappearance of a nation and the abandonment of Jewish law. The increasing persecution and dispersion in exile makes it very difficult for each generation to hold on to the vast body of Torah knowledge. Backed by the other sages of the time, he makes a bold decision to write down the bulk of the oral law. Until this point, oral law has remained, well, oral. It was prohibited to write down the Torah because this might equate human interpretation with that of divine text. Yet by Judah Hanassi's time, the Jewish people and many Jewish scholars are facing persecution, and there's a real risk of losing all that had previously been passed down by word of mouth. Judah Hanassi and the sages begin to compile some parts of the oral law into what we now call the Mishnah. The Mishnah translates to study in Hebrew and is comprised of 6 books and organized into 63 tractates. It's a miracle they found a publisher to print them all. Rav Judah Hanassi organizes and edits the collection by topic in a clear, concise manner, covering all areas of Jewish law. He writes down the laws just as they were received during his time, as a summation of different opinions where no final decisions have been reached. The Mishnah includes multiple perspectives on various matters, side by side with definite rulings handed down in earlier generations. It serves as a basic code of conduct, but more so, it provides later generations with the formulas for critical thinking and interpreting and developing Torah law. Until the Mishnah, Judaism had centered around the temple and the wisdom of the priests, known as Kohanim and Levites. With those positions now gone, Rabbi Judah Hanassi shifts the center of Jewish life more toward Torah study and practice. It's said of Judah Hanassi, from the time of Moses to the time of Rabbi Judah Hanassi, Torah and greatness were never so concentrated in one person. Judah Hanassi's primary goals are the maintenance and unity of the Jews in Israel, and he does this by encouraging widespread Torah study and observance of the religious and social code by all classes of people. He creates a social system based around the study of one unified text, and he preserves Hebrew as the language of prayer at a time when Aramaic is the daily language in the region. He becomes known simply as Rabbi, the teacher. During the 500 years of Roman rule, the Jewish people faced some harsh transitions into exile. Threats to the nation existed in the form of both persecution and dispersion. Yet, the presence of a Jewish people in the land of Israel never ceased. Men like Hillel, Shammai, and Rav Judah Hanassi took bold actions to ensure the continuation of Torah and a central Jewish community. And the decisions they made to repurpose the oral law created a sustained system of Jewish life that has endured to this day. The Mishnah laid the foundation for the Talmud, which laid the foundation for further study and interpretation. 2 millennia later, still without a temple, the Jewish people continue to thrive both in the diaspora and the land of Israel, using the very same codes of law that were preserved in the Mishnah and Talmud so long ago. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed what you saw.
Thank you, Jenny.
If you'd like
Judah the Prince did Judaism a great service by writing the Mishnah in Hebrew, even though most people in the year 200 were already speaking Aramaic. By doing this, he made sure that Hebrew would remain the Jewish language of prayer, liturgy, and study, so that as long as Judaism existed, Hebrew would also exist. By ensuring the continuation of Hebrew as the language of prayer and study, Judah the Prince laid the foundation for the resurgence of modern Israeli Hebrew in the 20th century when the state of Israel became a reality. Jenny, please. This is a commemorative medal honoring Judah the Prince. Jenny. Next one, please. This is the tomb of Judah the Prince. His tomb is in a cave inside a hillside in a national park in Israel. Thank you, Jenny. Now let's talk about Talmud. Last week, we talked about the Mishna, created by Judah the Prince, and looked at its development on the Talmud page. Jenny? As we noted, the Mishna, letter A in pink, occupies the top of the important inside box of text on the Talmud page. The Gemara, letter B, in yellow, sits directly below the Mishnah, and both are surrounded by commentaries. You can tell where a Mishnah ends and the Gemara begins because the Gemara announces itself. Jenny? This is a blow-up of the previous page. We see around Jenny's cursor the Hebrew letters Gimel and Mem, a G and an which stands for Gemara. Everything on top of this in pink is Mishnah. Everything below it in yellow is Gemara. Jenny? Now we're ready to explore the Gemara. We're all pretty much familiar with the saying, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So almost as soon as Judah the Prince completed and closed the Mishnah in about 200 CE, other rabbis started questioning, discussing, and debating the Mishnah. And the Gemara is the record of those debates about the Mishnah. Although Judah the Prince wrote the Mishnah in Hebrew, the rabbis that wrote the Gemara over the next 300 years wrote that text in Aramaic, which was then the common language of the people. So let's see how the Mishnah and the Gemara work together. Suppose we had a Mishnah in pink that said simply, don't murder. No, Jenny? Not yet, please. Okay, thanks. So we're going to see now how a Mishnah in pink that said, for example, don't murder. Now that seems pretty easy to comprehend, but over the next 300 years, other questions could arise, like these. What if you're at war? Can you kill or murder someone in war? If you can kill someone in war, can you do it on Shabbat? What if someone tries to kill you? Can you kill them in self-defense? What if someone tries to hurt your family? Can you kill them? What if someone only wants to rob you? Can you kill them? If someone has a terminal illness and was suffering greatly and they beg you to kill them, can you grant their wish and kill them? What if you kill someone accidentally? What if you hurt a pregnant woman and the mother dies, but the baby lives? Is that murder? Are you allowed to commit suicide and kill yourself? What if a person commits a capital crime? Can a court kill the person? What about blasphemy? Some religions consider that a capital crime. Can you kill someone for blasphemy? So we see that a simple Mishnah like don't murder has many nuances, and these nuanced questions would be the basis of a long Gemara discussion, which would appear directly below that Mishnah, where many rabbis would express their opinions over the years. Some opinions would say yes to these questions. Some opinions would say no. And all the opinions would still be preserved in the Talmud. Imagine the Mishnah as an onion, or the Gemara as an onion. With each question and debate, the sages are peeling away layer upon layer upon layer of the onion until they get to the central core, the fundamental essence of the onion, or in this case, the fundamental understanding of what murder is or killing. Once the rabbis understood the essence of that question, then they could use that knowledge and apply it to other similar situations then and on into the future. Even if the rabbis didn't come to a definitive conclusion on this issue, these extended Talmudic debates can still be used today to help answer current day questions like euthanasia, abortion, capital punishment, and suicide. So here, our Mishnah would be ultra short, 2 words, but the ensuing Gemara could take up 10, 15, 20 pages trying to answer the questions about those 2 words. Then, after that Gemara ends, that discussion ends, the page would then continue with a new Mishnah on a new topic, which would be followed by a new Gemara, and so on for 5,400 pages. It took about 300 years, from 200 to 500 CE, to complete the Gemara and to answer the many questions raised by the Mishnah. After the year 500, the Gemara was considered closed, and the Talmud, which consisted of the Mishnah and the Gemara, was born. Jenny, please. Now, Jenny, the terminology. Back one, please. Back one. Yes, thank you. So just to add more confusion, the Talmud has several definitions. The Talmud page that we're familiar with, that we're talking about, with the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the commentaries, is known as the Talmud. But the Mishnah and the Gemara alone, without the commentaries, is also known as Talmud. And to make it more confusing, in the Middle Ages, because of church persecution, the rabbis avoided saying the word Talmud altogether, and instead they used the word Gemara to refer to the whole of Talmud without raising the church's suspicions. Next, we turn to what is probably the most famous animal in legal history, the ox that gored another ox. Jenny, thank you. So we see on this slide that this comes from the book of Exodus, verses 28 and 29. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, its flesh not eaten, but the owner of the ox is not to be punished. If, however, that ox has been in the habit of goring and its owner, though warned, has failed to guard it, and it kills a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned and its owner too shall be put to death. So when an ox kills someone for the first time, the owner is not responsible for the ox's actions. But if the ox has a history of goring and the owner was warned but did not take any precautions to restrain the ox, then the owner is personally liable and could be put to death. Jenny? No, just me, please. Thank you. Now, the Talmud is not really interested in oxen. Rather, here the Talmud is really interested in exploring what one person's responsibility is to another person. What responsibility do we owe a fellow human being if we cause injury to them or their property? Now that seems relatively straightforward, but the rabbis of the Talmud found that the Torah verses did not answer the many complications that may arise in real life or in their minds. So the rabbis in the Gemara asked several questions. What does it mean to be warned? If the owner was warned after the ox gored someone, what does that mean if the next time the ox kicked someone? Would an owner whose ox gored a chicken be considered warned if the next time it gored a person? What if the ox gores a person who is already terminally ill and expected to die soon anyway? Should the owner of an ox that gores someone on Shabbat be punished the same as if the ox gored someone on a weekday? Or what if the ox was convicted on testimony that was later thrown out so that the ox was exonerated, But still later, that same testimony was found to be true, so that the ox became retroactively guilty. So some of these rabbinic scenarios are pretty far-fetched, and the matter in the Gemara is left undecided. Here, the rabbis are not really interested in what day of the week an ox gores another ox. Rather, if we recall the analogy of peeling away the onion skin to get to its core, we see that the Talmud is actually wrestling with basic human concepts. What is a person's duty and responsibility to his fellow man in case of injury? Could an injury or damages have been foreseen and prevented? Who is responsible for the animals in our care? These questions and their debates in Talmud form a basis for today's general liability laws. One of the first questions Judge Judy asks on television in any dog bite case is, has the dog bitten anyone before? So why does the Talmud insist on discussing these issues? The Talmud debates and debates an issue just like you pull and pull on a piece of fabric until you're able to pull out a single thread and then hold it up and examine it from every angle. It is through this process of looking at each individual thread that the rabbis and the Talmud were able to see the truth in each situation. And once you can see the truth in a situation, then you can determine what justice should be for that situation. And once you determine justice, then you can see if there are mitigating circumstances that justify mercy. So the ultimate purpose of a Talmudic discussion like this is to determine truth, administer justice, and apply mercy. It is these general principles of damage and liability which were then extrapolated from this discussion and which are used again and again for future issues, like how to deal with a car accident in a 21st century. Next, we see that the Talmud can veer off into fantastical realms, like this golem. Jenny? In Jewish folk legend, a golem is a man-made creature fashioned from clay that magically comes alive to fight the enemies of Judaism, a medieval Jewish superhero to protect Jews from pogroms. Thank you, Jenny. For Jews, to perform communal prayer, we need 10 people to make a minyan. In the Talmud, there is a discussion. Can a golem be counted as part of a minyan? Now, we could say that's a ridiculous question, and why should the Talmud even consider that? In this case, the Talmud is using the mythical figure of a golem as a straw man, a substitute for something else. By using a golem in this way, the Talmud is really looking at, examining, debating, what does it mean to be human? What defines a person? Is a human being who is brain dead in a deep coma still considered a person? Can an artificially created object like a golem or a robot with artificial intelligence have a soul? So by invoking the vision of a mythical golem, the Talmud ultimately is trying to discover, what does it mean to have a soul? What is the relationship of one human being to other people in the community? And what is the relationship between a human being and God? Everything in Talmud is there for a reason, even if the reason is not obvious. Lastly, to study Talmud, we must understand that the Talmud does not always follow logic as we understand it. For example, the logical format for a newspaper is that the most important information is on top, the next most important item is next, and so on and so on and so on in a logical order. But Talmud does not have to follow logic and can be like a stream of consciousness, conversation, jumping from one subject to another. For example, a Talmud passage may begin with a discussion of the laws of agriculture. Then, in the middle of that discussion, one rabbi may mention a bird, and the discussion turns, and everyone begins to talk about birds. Then in the middle of that discussion, another rabbi may mention a rainbow. And then the discussion turns and they all begin to talk about rainbows. Now, this format seems odd to us, but is perfectly at home in Talmud. The explanation is that according to Jewish tradition, Torah is God's blueprint for all of creation. Everything God created in the world is found in Torah. Therefore, because everything around us was created by the same God using the same Torah, then everything around us is also God's creation and therefore worthy of serious study. Whether it is agriculture or a bird or a rainbow, since all are God's creations through Torah, all deserve the exact same seriousness of discussion. No one object in Talmud has greater significance than any other object. So no matter how the discussions spin out, everything is treated with the same seriousness. No matter how a conversation turns, it's all relevant in Talmud because everything in the world is God's creation. So I'm going to stop here. Today, we saw how one man, Judah HaNasi, saved Judaism in its darkest hour. Jenny? He created the Mishna, the repository of oral law, which is section A in pink, which led to the Gemara, which is section B in yellow, which is the first and most important commentary on the Mishnah. And he was ultimately responsible for the creation of the Talmud, which guided Judaism for centuries. Next week, I'll discuss Rashi, and that's the blue section labeled C on the right-hand side of the page, another great figure in the history of Talmud and the history of Judaism. Thank you. Rabbi?
Thank you both to Richard and to Sheldon for your beautiful summary of very complex history and development of the Mishnah and the Gemara. I'd like to share my screen, but I want to make sure that you all have something sweet to eat. I have dates on my desk, and I'm going to take something out. Maybe you have a cookie or a fruit or something. Here we go. Something sweet for our study, something to drink so that we are constantly revitalized. So call me a bivaro. And we're going to dive into the actual pages or study of a shtickle Talmud, a little bit of Talmud. I'll share my screen now. So as you learned, there are Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, 6 orders of the Mishnah, and that is the same organization for the Talmud. And within each order, there are tractates leading to 63 tractates. There's both story and ruling, Agadah and Halacha, or I could call that lore and law, and they're intertwined. So sometimes a story leads to the precedent for a ruling, and sometimes there is a halacha that says this is the ruling, but not always. So every time I'm going to teach you one story or halacha, I'll tell you where it's found. I have 2 to offer today. One is in Seder Nizikin, which means like damages, and it's in the tractate Bava Metzia, Bava meaning gate. This is the center gate, and it talks about lost and found property and fraud and such comments. But just as Sheldon said, sometimes the conversation veers, and you'll see how widely it could veer. These are other tractates within the order of Nezikin. All right, so here we go. Bava Metzia 59a, and it's called the Oven of Achnai, and another title might be Not in Heaven. So the mixture of Aramaic and Hebrew continues. Again, every time you see bold, that's really the words that you see. That's why this is a paragraph and this is just one line, because it's much more concentrated. So anything bold is actually a word translated, and the rest is just filling in so that we understand. So as they were talking about verbal mistreatment, they suddenly turn not to rainbows or birds, but to talking about the kashrut the purity of a kind of oven. We learned in a Mishnah, that's how the Gemara often starts. It says, you know what, we're talking about this Mishnah, but I have a question. Here's what the Mishnah says. If one cut an earthenware oven widthwise into segments and place sand between each and every segment, sort of like blocks, Rabbi Eliezer said, oh, it's ritually pure. Because of the sand, its legal status is not that of a complete vessel, it's pieces, and therefore it is not susceptible to ritual impurity. But the rest of the rabbis thought, no, it's ritually impure, as it really is functionally a complete oven. If you didn't follow that, don't even worry. It's not supposed to be so clear. Now, the Gemara goes on to ask, this is known as the oven of Achnai. What is the relevance of Achnai, which is related to the word snake in this context? Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, and you'll often hear a string of who said, according to whom, according to whom. You're always supposed to offer the precedent of who spoke, the attribution. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, it is characterized in that manner due to the fact that the rabbis surrounded with their statements like this snake, which often forms a coil when at rest, and they deemed it impure. So they were having wordplay here. Achnai sounds like snake. The arguments were coiled around like a snake. The sages taught on that day when they discussed this matter, Rabbi Eliezer, who's going to be the focus of our talk, answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion, but the rabbis did not accept his explanation from him. So imagine logical multiplicity of answers, they don't accept it, one against many. I found some illustrations. The oven referenced on this page is referred to as tanur shel achnai, an oven of a snake, which was a reference to how the rabbis surrounded Rabbi Eliezer with answers, like a snake coils and does not allow escape. Here's even a more fanciful sort of the oven as snake with the flames in the middle. They surrounded it with words of debate like an achnai, like a snake, and declared it impure. Here they are arguing, no, it can't be, but it's written here. I'm thinking. So I thought this illustration was very sweet. So you can imagine they're all talking about this oven. Is it pure or is it impure because of how it's built? So after failing to convince the rabbis with logic, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, and this is the fanciful part that you heard about today, if the halacha, the ruling, is in accordance with my opinion, let this carob tree prove it. A carob tree is going to prove an argument? Well, we've gone beyond the rational here. The carob tree immediately was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, that's pretty far, and some say 400 cubits, even further. And the rabbi said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from the carob tree. So he's going to try again. Rabbi Eliezer then said, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, this stream will prove it. And the water in the stream miraculously turned backward, began flowing in the opposite direction. Have you ever seen such a thing happening as a proof? And they said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from a stream. So then Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, okay, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it. Oh my goodness, the walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. But Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halacha, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute? Asking the walls, what's it to you? And so the Gemara relates, the walls did not fall because of the deference due to Rabbi Yehoshua, but they did not straighten because of the deference due Rabbi Eliezer, and they still remain leaning. So the walls are moving, the stream is moving, the tree is uprooted. Very amazing kinds of proof that you think would shock them into agreeing. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, okay, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. He's going to the ultimate. A divine voice, a bat kol, emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer, as the halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion? He's got a very good track record. And the answer is, Rabbi Yehoshua stood on his feet and said, it is written, it is not in heaven. Now, this particular part is something that I have chosen to read on Yom Kippur for our Torah reading. Lo b'shamayim hi, It is not in heaven, that you might say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it unto us and make us to understand it, that we may do it. And it's not beyond the sea, that you have to say, well, who will go over the sea and bring it to us and help us understand so we can do it? No, no, no. The word is very, very near. It's me'od, me'od in the Devar, me'od. It's very near to you in your mouth and in your heart, bilavabacha, that you can do it, la'asoto. So that is the reference that Rabbi Yeshua offers. And the Gemara asks, what is the relevance of the phrase, it is not in heaven, in this context? So why are you pulling that phrase? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a bat kol, a divine voice, as you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah, after a majority to incline. So they take a quote from Exodus and say, it was given then, and since the majority of rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the halacha is not ruled in accordance with his opinion. They're going after the majority and not all of these heavenly signs. The Gemara further relates, years after, Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah the prophet and said to him, see, here's another kind of fantastic image. He's asking Elijah the prophet, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at that time when Rabbi Yeshua issued his declaration? Here's what Elijah said. The Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, aha, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. So let me stop sharing just for a second and think about that. The fact that you'd think it would be pretty impressive that all of these miraculous signs come up and they'd say, oh, well, if that's so, then okay, we'll go along with you. But no, even with all the quotes and all the imagery, it goes according to the ruling of the majority in every time. So I just want you to be thinking about that, about what kind of authority is that proposing? What kind of power is that investing in the rabbis who are making the rules? I'm going to offer a second story, and then we're going to look at both of these together. Let's share the screen. Okay, this is from a different order of Nashim, which is all about women, and it's from the tractate Yevamot, which talks about certain aspects of marriage and agunot. Those are women who can't get a divorce and can't remarry, and they veer, again, not to birds and rainbows, but to a discussion of, how should you describe a bride? As beautiful or as she is? And they talk about, what if she's lame? What if she's blind? What if she, do you tell the truth or not? All right, so this is like telling the truth, or can one lie? From Yevamot. And Rabbi Elea said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, again, they're always giving attribution, it is permitted for a person to depart from the truth in a matter that will bring peace, as it is stated. Your father commanded before he died, saying, so you shall say to Yosef, please pardon your brother's crime, from Genesis. Now, Jacob actually never issued this command, but his sons falsely attributed this statement to him. Why? In order to preserve peace between them and Joseph. And, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai disagreed as a point of sort of pride. They always disagreed. And in one famous story, they debated what words you should sing when dancing in front of a bride. Remember, that is a mitzvah, to make the bride and groom joyous and to say funny things and to dance in front of them. The rabbis from Hillel's school advised dancers to chant the same words in front of every bride. What a beautiful and graceful bride. The rabbis from the school of Shammai point out that that would be dishonest. What if she's lame or blind? Are you really going to say what a beautiful and graceful bride? Shammai scholars take a hard line against lying. They suggest each bride should be described kamoshehi, as she is. And what's more important, telling the truth or making others feel good? Jewish law, and I've written this in red, almost always comes down in favor of Hillel. We bend the truth and call even the ugliest bride a beauty. Some situations call for a pretty lie rather than an ugly truth. And here is the Gemara on this. The sages taught, how does one dance before the bride? What does one recite while dancing at her wedding? Well, Beit Shammai says, the bride as she is, emphasizing her good qualities. You can say she has a good personality. Beit Hillel says one recites a fair and attractive bride. So Beit Shammai said to Beit Hillel, so this is a school, not just a person. In a case where the bride was lame or blind, does one say regarding her a fair and attractive bride? Because the Torah states, keep you from a false matter. Do not lie. Beit Hillel said to Beit Shammai, according to your statement, with regard to one who acquired an inferior acquisition from the market, should another praise it and enhance its value in its eyes, or condemn it and diminish its value in his eyes? In other words, somebody already bought something. Should you say, oh, have you been gypped? Is that terrible? That's not worth what you paid for it? No, you must say that he should praise it and enhance its value in his eyes and refrain from causing him anguish. I mean, the deed's already done. From here, the sages said, aha, here's a bottom line. A person's disposition should always be empathetic with mankind and treat everyone courteously. In this case, too, once the groom has married his bride, one praises her as being fair and attractive. The chuppah is already done. They're already married. You're dancing in front of them at the reception. Raise her in his estimation by praising her. Now, they go further and say, well, how do you praise all kinds of people, not just brides, but scholars? Let's take what you say for a bride and apply it to others. This is what they sing before brides in the West. In the West means Eretz Yisrael. Remember the map? Babylonia was farther to the east. So when they say in the West, they mean in the land of Israel. No eyeshadow, no rouge, no braiding of the hair. In other words, she doesn't need any enhancement. And yet she is comparable to a graceful ibex, a mountain animal that bounds very gracefully through the mountains. The Gemara relates, when the sages ordained Rabbi Zerah, this is what they metaphorically sang with regard to him. Also, they said, almost like a bride, no eyeshadow, no rouge, no braiding of the hair, and yet comparable to a graceful ibex. So in his ordination, they sang beautiful things. See how they keep moving in their discussion. And then they use rhymes and mnemonic devices and sort of plays on words. When the sages ordained Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, this is what they sang to them to praise them. Anyone from people of this kind and anyone from people of that kind, ordain them for us. But on the contrary, do not ordain for us, neither from those who corrupt, sarmisin halachot, nor from those who are worthless, sarmitin. And some say, not from those who provide 1/5 hamisin, or one of the reason for halacha, and not for those whose knowledge is incomplete, turmisin. So when you see it here, you say, mina sarmisin, velo mina tarmisin, velo mina hamisin, velo mina turmisin. They have rhymes that are sort of funny, and that's part of the play of the wording in the Talmud. And so they go off on how do you compliment people? How do you greet people? How do you show them honor? And when Rabbi Abahu would come from the academy to the house of the emperor, the maidservants of the emperor's house would go out to greet him, and this is what they sang to him. Master of his people, leader of his nation, candle of illumination, blessed is your arrival in peace. They're showing different ways of complimenting people. Now, if you're going to compliment, how far do you go? I mean, these are people of stature, these rabbis. So with regard to the mitzvah of bringing joy, here's the mitzvah to the bride and groom. The Gemara relates, the sages said about Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli that he would take a myrtle branch and dance before the bride and say, a fair and attractive bride. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzhak would base his dance on 3 myrtle branches, and he would juggle them. So the guys are juggling and dancing. Rabbi Zerah said, the old man is humiliating us through his conduct. He is demeaning the Torah and the Torah scholars. You've gone too far, dancing and juggling, come on. And there's a whole other sentence here about how a pillar of fire demarcates only for either one person in a generation, anyway, they're saying for some people it's okay, for other people it's not. And they use, again, rhymes, shotite, shetute, shitate, to say, you know what, for some people it works. Some people can get away with it. You know, for some people it's okay. And oh, and then there was the question, wait a minute, he went even further. Rav Aha would place the bride on his shoulders and dance. The sages said to him, what's the ruling? Is it permitted for you to do so as well? And he said to them, well, if brides are comparable for you to a beam, like nothing like a piece of wood in the ceiling, fine. But if not so, you may not. Other rabbis said, it is permitted to look at the face of bride throughout all 7 days of the wedding celebration, the Sheva Brachot. Why? Sort of to make her husband feel, oh, everyone thinks she's beautiful, in order to endear her to her husband, whose appreciation of her beauty will be enhanced. The Gemara notes, and the halacha, the ruling is not in accordance with his opinion. It is prohibited to look at any married woman, even a bride. So they don't even agree. And here the discussion veers into honor and priorities. What comes first, a funeral procession, a wedding procession, or a king passing with an entourage? And the ruling is that you reroute the funeral procession for the wedding procession of a bride, but it happened once that King Agrippa rerouted his whole entourage before the wedding procession, and he was praised for that. And now this is interesting because King Herod Agrippa was a grandson of Herod the Great. He ruled over Judea and Samaria, and he really liked the Roman and Greek theater and gladiator battles, and he was a builder of amphitheaters, but he displayed sensitivity to halacha. So that he's cited here that he did a good thing. And so he was praised and said, you know what? Honor is not relinquished. Somebody who dances before a bride or reroutes his entourage, he doesn't lose his honor by seemingly lessening himself. That is more or less what goes on. So at every of our classes now, we're going to have a moment where the light bulb goes off and we go, Rega, choshvim. The educational television in Israel does that. They go, Rega, lomdim, just a second, we're learning. And they'll stop the skit to talk about the grammar. So here, Rega, choshvim, we're just thinking, what is the underlying issue in these stories? With all those stories that you heard about the ox and about the bride and about the oven, what is the guiding principle behind who has the right to give a ruling? Or whether an honored rabbi should dance before a bride? Or which procession, a wedding, a funeral, or a king, takes precedence? Think of the oven, think of the ruling, think of the fantastic discussions with Elijah the prophet. What do we get out of all that? Rega, choshvim. And so in the few minutes remaining to us, it's hard when there are three of us trying to pack in so much information. I'd love some responses. What do you see here as the underlying issue in these stories?
Rabbi, if I could just make a comment, please.
Sure.
Just to put it in perspective, say there was remember the pink is a Mishna in the page that I showed, and the yellow is Gemara. The pink on top would say, you should make a bride joyful on her wedding day. That's all it would say. And that would be written in Hebrew. And then below that, the yellow part in the text in the middle of the page, I said, everything the rabbi said, everything would be Gemara and yellow and be written Aramaic. So a little simple Mishnah on top and this whole explanation in Aramaic in the yellow on bottom. Thank you.
So any reactions? That's a lot of material, I know, but do you have any spark? Did the light bulb go off at all for you to feel, I think I get it. Nancy Trent, what do you think?
It's complicated. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's complicated. There's a lot of opinions, and as we go through life, and it's always difficult to figure out what's the right thing to do. It's complicated, but you have to think it through. And I think you get rewarded more for trying to do the right thing than it isn't really the thing that you do. It's the thinking that I think is really what Hashem is going after here.
Okay, and why do you think that all the rabbis get to trump the idea, the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, even though all of nature, including the divine voice, came out in his favor? What was that?
Because God loves us, and the most important, life is school. That life is school, and as like you shouldn't be paralyzed and not knowing how you should handle every situation, but you shouldn't just you should think about what is the relevance and what's going on here, and I'm really grateful that I'm looking at it like this. There isn't one answer, and that one answer is different today, tomorrow, an hour from now. It's okay.
Right, and we have to say that the minority opinions are recorded. They don't say, okay, bottom line, everything else is erased, because that minority opinion might be needed in the future. That's always noted. It seems to me that there's a commitment to the rule of law and decisions made rationally by human beings, and that we don't look to signs to veer our journey and our decisions. It's not like, well, if I find a penny in front of my toe, I'll say yes. It's not like that. So they're saying a commentary and interpretation is going to continue throughout, and we're going to see that even more in next week's selections. Linda Patton and then Anita. You need to unmute. I don't have that possibility. I don't know if Jenny can do it, but there you go.
Okay, thank you. Rabbi, I am not sure what I'm thinking is correct, but it seems to me that the intent of prayer and trying to do the right thing for fellow Jews is the most important. In other words, in every situation, as Nancy was saying, in every situation we're in, just to expound on it, it has to be the good of the situation that you're in, is what I'm getting from it. I don't know if that's right.
Well, certainly the idea of applying it in a kind way is the ruling. So we got that from how do you praise a bride, and what do you speak about somebody who already bought something? Don't rub it in. Okay, Anita.
Yeah, with the Rabbi Eliezer, who wound up getting excommunicated, but I'm trying to think of how that's connected with being sensitive to other people, because all the other rulings were sensitivity for other people. But with Rabbi Eliezer, where it winds up that once God gave us the Torah on Sinai, that was from God, and then it was, okay, now this is human. Okay, now you are responsible for doing, so we've got the heavenly law and we've got the earthly human law. And there really a lot of difference between them, because we can't be that high.
Right, and you'll see that more. I picked 2 other selections for next time that will expound on that more. And that whole discussion with Rabbi Eliezer, it does end in the idea of what is honor, because he does get kicked out of the.
But he was dishonored.
He was dishonored, but then it talked more about honor later, as he's visited and as he is. They're sensitive to the fact that he was
when he died. When he was dying.
There's a much longer story, and I didn't know where to cut it off, so I cut it off right there. But the idea of, do you honor the living more than the dead? Do you honor the bride and the groom before the funeral procession? And what about a king? And again, as Sheldon so beautifully said, it's way beyond the particular story. It's how do we relate to each other? who has the right to offer an opinion, and how do we implement this in our daily life? So this is what we're going to see more and more as the weeks go on in the stories that we will be bringing to you. And hopefully it won't quite go so fast. We can go delving a little bit more deeply. Is there any other comment you want to make? I thought I saw Abe's hand and then Anne. Abe, do you know how to unmute? If not, Jenny, can you help him? Yes, there you go. Let's hear Abe.
Like all stories that we read in the Gemara or in the Bible, it is always confusing because there's always more than one answer. So you really have to find the right answer within yourself and believe what you believe in.
Amen. But we're adding to the pink and the yellow and the blue. We're adding to the page even as we speak. Anne?
Hi. I guess what I take away from it is, firstly, kind of broadly, just this idea of let us consider, sort of as the overarching, let us consider these alternatives, these other opinions, these scenarios. Let us consider the time we're living in. Just let us consider. And then secondly, it seems like another overarching theme, which I think was expressed by others as well, is just what is the human impact of my action?
What is the human impact of my action? Very good. And with Hillel and Shammai, as we'll see next week, Shammai is more strict, perhaps more correct, but Hillel is more compassionate. And the ruling is most often by Hillel because Hillel would really listen and they would have to reframe and repeat Shammai's argument before giving their own, which is how we should be listening, right? And not just say, I'm not listening to you, but I'm going to jump in the minute I can with my idea. No, we're supposed to listen and say, I think what you're saying is, and really honor the other person's opinion because they came up with it for some reason. And who knows, maybe Elijah will pop into the conversation and offer an opinion that's even heavenly. So we're about at our time and we're no way finished and our conversation will continue, and let us consider.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.